and experience and common sense mainly. Because again, in 30 years of being a child psychiatrist and adult as well, I haven't encountered not one single child that doesn't learn. The only difference children have is the rhythm, the style, the process, the timing, and the way they integrate and how we could adjust, right? Create that proximal zone of development, which Vygotsky would always talk about. And so if that brain is not stressed and is being respected in its timing for its experience, that child is going to learn. So most of what child psychiatry and diagnosis, especially coming from this ICD-10 or the DSM-5, are telling us, we're confusing symptoms and treating symptoms instead of understanding behavior. And so this is the big paradigm shift in child development. We're not using symptoms like attention deficit, hyperactivity, impulsivity, self-simulation as signs that the child has a diagnosis, but as signs of dysregulation of their nervous system. And so if a child is not regulating it, is not self-regulating, he needs people around them who will help them self-regulate by co-regulation. And so the more children we have and the more complex the children are, the more we need to voluntarily learn how to co-regulate. And that's what mindfulness is all about. Because our skills as just regular people in a world that is called VUCA today, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it's not enough for us to be good people or good skills. We need to professionalize those human skills, and basically mindfulness is that 5,000-year-old contemplative practice that allows us to always, despite of what's happening outside, to keep some clarity and calmness inside. And if there's someone who needs calmness and clarity and coherence in a world that's called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, is children, because those are the ones who are mostly suffering the unpredictability of this world. So that's what we'll be talking about. That's kind of a synthesis. I'm going to first apologize. You might find some translation. I translated some of these slides from Spanish directly, and some might have some Spanish words in them, but you'll be able to follow me. So basically, this isn't only about special education or children with special needs, because the increase of children who have supposedly disabilities or who have different learning styles has increased exponentially. The last numbers we have from the CDC in the United States, which are replicable in other parts of the world, is 1 of every 31 children is being diagnosed with autism. When I started 30 years ago, it was 2 to 4 children every 10,000 children who are having autism. So this is almost, a 300% increase in the last 30 years, which genetics doesn't increase that way. We might know more about the diagnosis, but our learning styles, our learning rhythms, how we treat the world, what we choose to eat, what we put in a supermarket, and so many other things are causing many difficulties, and not only in child development, but most of our big issues in the world: inequality, discrimination, exploitation of nature, contamination, lack of meaning, autism, teenage suicides. They're all problems which are called WICT. WICT problems are problems that are so based on interdependent variables that we need a new way of understanding the world to be able to know what to do, right? Because we have these increases. We have this, which is probably one of the most main causes, which is causing an increase in children shifting away from normal development, and really, especially after the pandemic. So we're at a point where we can't keep on solving problems in a linear way. We need to know how you elevate levels of consciousness so you can see in a more interdependent way. And that is basically mindfulness, where we could see our beliefs, we could see, and we have to unlearn beliefs to really establish a new way of relating with the presence, right? And this isn't actually new, because one of the main challenges of the world is the result of the difference between how nature functions and how people think. So this is not new. Mindfulness allows us to reconnect with the way of thinking, which not only thinks, but feels the connection between everything. When we don't feel connected and we're in our own world, we decrease our levels of empathy, because empathy could be cultural, who I love and I take care of the people I know, my neighbors, my country, my religion, my ideology, but I don't have empathy for people who are different from myself. And that's a cultural empathy. Life empathy, or true empathy, is actually something I have. It's primordial. I have it since I've been born, but I have to learn how to decrease the beliefs that I think I am what I think, and start really knowing how to come back to having the life force be an identity as well. So mindfulness is a way of unidentifying with my beliefs and starting to identify with the feeling of being alive, because life doesn't mistreat life. And that's an identity part, which allows a true natural empathy to awaken, right? And when we're talking about children who have different learning styles, most of us have been taught and have learned in a way where the label is larger than the child. The diagnosis is larger than the child. And this is automatic. It's not bad. It's not something that's wrong. It really depends on how I use it. It could be something that helps the health system. It's something that helps statistics. But when I'm relating with a child, I have to put away the label of autism, ADHD, or whatever, and really have to respect the timing of that co-regulation. I have to feel that child, because true empathy is not only being able to put yourself in the shoes of someone else, but that person to feel that he's being felt by you. So that's where the circuit of empathy closes. It's not only a one way, it's a both ways where we know we're both in connection. And that's one of the best ways to co-regulate, to decrease a child who may be having a dysregulation or having difficulties with regulating his own behavior or his learning, or having self-stimulation behaviors. So the way my presence resonates with that child is very important, because most of the times we're only centered on trying to control behavior or trying to teach them skills which will make them look normal or more closer to normality. And that's a method, that's a model that we'll be looking at, because we're coming out of a medical rehabilitation model. We left the precedence model, which was like in early Rome, or in late Rome, early Rome, I mean, where actually whoever was different was actually just thrown off a cliff, right? And that turned, we'll see how the story of this new, it's called a social model, which actually doesn't look at disability in the people. It puts the responsibility on the community. So people aren't disabled. It's the responsibility of the community to be able to create the conditions and lift the barriers which allow for equal levels of opportunity. It's not equality, it's opportunities which we talk about. So maybe if a child, one of the postdocs I did was in Columbia University, United States, and that was about a learning opportunities, right? How many opportunities of learning does a child need to crystallize a learning? Some children learn if you put the material 3 times, you explain, he learns it. Others need 5, others need 10, others need 50. And they need that the first time or the 50th time that I present it, I be the same and I look the same. And I really give the opportunities in a way that increase the ability to learn. But most of us, usually after 3 or 4 times of explaining something, if the child does not understand, we start becoming involved emotionally. We start losing patience. We start changing the material. And so maybe children who just need more time are the ones who are going to be more affected by our levels and states of presence. And they are the ones who need most of our capacity to self-regulate, to co-regulate, right? But coming back to this, this paradigm shift that's happening now, going from a mechanical linear model to an interdependent model, is so much related to our practice of mindfulness, of being able to really acquire states of clarity and calmness, which allows us constantly to come from a reduced point of view to a more open view, where I include myself to see how I'm paying attention and how I'm connected with you, and how my level and my rhythm is affecting the child, right? And this is from Gregory Bateson. He's a biologist from UK. And he actually, this is a graphical way of putting how we're changing models, right? Our traditional model is trying to control. I want to control, and if I can control something outside, I feel safe. But now in a VUCA world where we have more children, more classrooms, what they're being taught in schools isn't really giving them a meaning. They're full of information. They get all the information from their smartphones. And so there's a big lack of meaning. That means we're at a paradigm shift. We have to shift the meaning from which we're teaching and we're living, actually. Because if we try to keep on controlling, we really thought we could control. But actually that's our paradigm that's coming from, I think, from the medieval and the resonance, Renaissance, right? Which is where we came into this scientific paradigm. But actually it comes up much before there, when we were first hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers, probably 40,000 years ago, child development and child rearing was in communities. Once we went into the agrarian revolution, we started changing from maybe a matriarchal, how do you say, it's from like a female matriarchal or patriarchal models. I don't know if someone knows the difference or I'm trying to explain. Which there's subsidies. I think the last one was in Crete, probably some 10,000 or maybe 8,000 years ago, which maybe the main leaders of the community were mothers and grandmothers and female, who have a different style of how, and the importance of how child is reared and how a state is run, from more of an energy which comes more from control, conquer, and compete, which is more a masculine type of energy, right? So we're in this paradigm shift where we're learning that which is the least expensive, which is the one that needs someone from the outside to control, which is the one that needs a lot of attention being put. We know that it's that garden, that beautiful garden that looks so beautiful, and actually we might think it is even more beautiful than the natural jungle, which actually is, a jungle is self-regulated, has its own intelligence, it evolves on its own. It's just like leaving my cell phone plugged at night, and it self-actualizes every single day, right? It's like if my cell phone would only, like from an old iPhone 10, it could go to 11, 13, 15 on its own, right? And that's what our natural intelligence is about, because we didn't arrive in this form just by chance. I mean, this is an evolutionary process which is called syntropy, which on its own, a biological organism, which is a one-celled organism, which appeared, we don't know how, 3.4 billion years ago. That's something amazing, and we think that we know, which we don't know how life started from inorganic matter to organic matter, and one cell appear, and everything we see in the world comes from one single origin. And that has been evolved. So we could see that evolution goes to a subtle and complex way. And we're going into a way where we're understanding that the more we're not present, the more we are disconnected from that syntropy that is actually helping or causing evolution, right? So now it's not to say that everything that we've done has not been right. It's we need a new level of consciousness to use that for a shared humanity and a common good, and not for individual purposes, right? And so each child who has a different learning style, and the more challenging that learning style is, I'm not sure here in Argentina, we're in a process of that schools are all inclusive. They can't choose now. The educational, special education system is kind of at some point closing down. We're still in a dilemma and a lot of discussions about that. People who agree that children need to be in the regular education no matter what, and other people who say that's not natural, that's not where they should be. They should be all put together in another place, right? And I think that discussions like this are happening all over the world as we things increasing. So we're going from a model which thinks separately and in boxes to understand that systemic thinking, which is actually not thinking, the new level of consciousness brought to by our ability to understand what mindfulness brings, is a new level of thinking, which is called think feelingly. We feel and we think in simultaneous. We've been animals. We were emotional. We just reacted instinctively. 50,000 years ago, our mind developed for some way. We don't know how. 50,000, maybe that was by psychedelics. Maybe that was cultural. We're not sure why the mind appeared. And the mind had the ability to appreciate beauty, and not only need food or sex or procreation or survival to obtain meaning. So we started being able to obtain meaning just by thinking, and to feel awe or love by deciding how to connect with reality. And as we started being so good about thinking has actually at this point separated us from the real world, which is where now all the contemplative practices are helping join both. Emotions are already are not now anymore for survival, but for self-development and evolution. Because I will still be angry, I will still have envy and jealousness and all the emotions that we have, but now they're not caused by something outside. They're caused by my beliefs and how I think the world and myself. And I can undo that by looking at myself and be able to co-regulate myself, to be able to connect with the energy of that jungle. So this is kind of the summary of this first part, that we're going from a linear mechanical comprehension of life and the universe toward a systemic and interdependent understanding in which everything is connected. What connects us? Our level of vibration. Emotions are states of vibration, and where we can best see that is when we have a newborn, our own newborn, or another baby. Babies are their ability to survive has to do with connection and with empathy. They could feel our states of resonance. And most children today are being child-reared in states of stress. So if a baby feels that the adult who takes care of him is stressed, he thinks that there's a predator, that there's a tiger or something, that there's some, so they don't know it's because I'm having economical, financial, or family difficulties, right? So everywhere we look at, on one hand, we need to understand the role of mindfulness beyond the ability of just to obtain more peace or stress relief, but it's very related to evolution and to what we naturally happens when a child is born. Because initially, maybe 1 week, 3 months, we do emanate states of unconditional love that we're going to talk about now. But once we start comparing our baby to the next door neighbors, to friends of our friends, or how we have to dress, or what school he's going to be, that level of unconditional love starts decreasing. But in that example, we could see that if we are able to resonate states of unconditional love, because we have our own sound, and actually our baby just cries, he soils every 3 hours, we can't sleep, but still he's not doing anything, but we still have love, infinite love for that baby. And that's a kind of a little vignette of what unconditional love looks like, because I'm not receiving anything in return. I might have some ideas, but actually it's something that comes more from our body and not from our thought. Once he sits down and he starts crawling, we start comparing and we start thinking, and that's not wrong. It's just to transfer or transmit the subtlety of that. If a baby could cause me to produce something I have, what if I learn not to have a baby to resonate those states of unconditional love? And that unconditional love is the same love that caused us to be who we are 400,000 years ago. I'm going to give some data about that. So we have this capacity. and we're not turning it on, and especially for those who mostly need it as a technique. So it's like professionalizing mindfulness for children who have different learning styles. So we have our states of present, and obviously we have the curriculum, right? We need to, this is not to talk about the didactics of how I adjust a curriculum. This initially is mainly about how my state of presence, no matter what I have to do, is maybe one of the most important aspects that regulates or dysregulates a child who has a different learning style, right? So this is where we're at in history, right? When the model of precedence was ancient history to the 1800s. This is what we are talking about, marginalization and throwing babies off the cliff if they weren't quote unquote normal. In the 1900s, with rarely followed by the medical model, we started medicalizing child development and denaturalizing, but it was very helpful. This doesn't mean that things weren't helpful. But in the 70s, and especially also motorized by the Convention of Human Rights and the rights of children as well, we started looking at things a little bit closer and seeing that it's not the person who has a disability, it's the responsibility of the community. But obviously that depends. I mean, this could be something politically correct, which you have to be good, or actually you can learn really to know how you get in touch with your primordial goodness and love, which is, again, the practice of mindfulness, which would be a conscious social model, which has to do with metacognition, seeing, because you can't oblige anyone to be empathic. The person might look empathic because she has to do, because she's a teacher in the school where the director is talking about a full inclusion 100%, and she has 2 or 3 children with different learning styles and maybe complex different learning styles, but the children will notice who we are and where we are in regards to our opinion or our beliefs about the children. And most of the behaviors that we see usually are a disengagement of these really subtle levels of who I think you are and what I need. How do I look at you? How many times do I speak to you in a day? There's really interesting research about language that when a child has a typical development, usually for his first 6 years, they usually receive probably 50,000 words per day. And those 50,000 words per day are usually empathic, are happy, are about things that are happening, and are social exchanges about just whatever is happening in the world, is sharing, social sharing. When I'm concerned that I have a child who has a developmental disability or a child with developmental disability, usually that kind of words, and also socially this happens as well, drops to 10,000 or even 20,000. And the tone of voice, what I'm sharing, the looks, the resonance usually has to do with imperative language, which is give orders instead of descriptive language. So we see there's a huge impact in the way we look at a child. Do I see a child as a living being who has full rights and really is learning and just has a different learning style? Or as soon as I see that there's a difference, I really have the diagnosis first, which the doctor gave me maybe in 15 minutes. He said my child has autism or has cerebral palsy, and kindly generates a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So that's how dehumanized or insensitive we've become. And we actually think it's normal, or we might think, okay, well, we can't be so ideal to think. But actually, it doesn't mean that we have to think that one model is wrong and the other is right. This is how evolution works. I mean, whatever we see happening in the world is coherent for the level of consciousness. And the more I connect with my identity as a living being instead of Christian Plebst, a doctor who has a family, which are all beliefs which I have in my head and I have to protect. But if my identification also is coming really from identifying from a living being and from the life I have inside, I will usually tend to look more at the eyes of people and find what unites us, right? What is common. When you look at someone's eyes, you feel and you see life in the other person instead of only the labels or the forms, right, or the roles that person has in society. And if you do it at a certain rhythm, that is called like sensibility. Sensibility is the ability to sense, right, from where I am looking at you. What is in my head? Am I listening, or am I just listening to myself while I'm listening to you, right? And this is very important. So this gives also rise. So we have these two models that are coming in. So it's not only about being good and talking about mindfulness. We have models that are actually sustaining that this is what is coming, right? The social model and the neurodiversity way of looking at neurodivergent children, right? Let me see. I'm going to get this out of the way here. So if there's any questions or anything, you can write them, or we could we could start writing them, because the idea of all of this is to be very practical and not to think that I'm talking about an ideal. So it's talking less. There's an S missing there, about treatments, and more about rearing children who have diverse integration, processing, and learning styles and rhythms, right? So the diagnosis is good for epidemics, epidemiology, to know how the social system has to administrate its resources. But when I'm in with a child, I have to know that most of us has been educated in the deficit way of looking. And so I'll have that model come up. But if I can see my own mind, I could see what's coming up, right? Because it doesn't matter that it comes up. It matters how do I pay attention to that, and in which model I'm working from, right? That you have a deficit or that you have a different learning style. And I have to create the conditions for your nervous system to not be stressed, and for yourself to really have, to really want to learn. I mean, there's no living organism that doesn't want to learn. If an organism doesn't want to learn, it means that it's being, it's something is happening in regards with how it's being seen from the system and the environment. And now I'm going to talk more about that. This is another way of looking at it. This is from a book from the, I think it says at the bottom right. I can't see it now. I think it's 2010 or before that, from Thomas Armstrong. He wrote about a book about neurodiversity, which actually is a term which comes from Australia, from a psychologist whose name is Singer, who put together a lot of principles. Neuroharmony, I think, is a term who is by Peter van Meulen, who is he's a Belgian psychiatrist, which has a model. It's called Happy. For creating that state of safeness where it's all about that central nervous system to being in harmony. And harmony has to do with how you relate to the people, to the environment, and to what you have to learn, right? And that has to be based on wanting to learn, right? And on voluntarily wanting to learn, right? If children are very good in complying, but maybe they're not learning today. They have to go to school, learn things which are obsolete. They have to get grades. And that's a very obsolete model for what our potential is and how we arrived here. So whether a person is viewed as disabled or gifted is influenced largely by the historical and cultural environment in which they live, right? So the environment and how we look at things. Success depends on the degree of fit between the individual's state of regulation, or his brain, and the demands on the environment, right? So we have the data, right?
There's one question in the chat. Someone asks, do you mean by different learning styles, children with needs or all children?
That's a very good question, because in that question we could see if we look at nature doesn't make a difference. Everyone has. You can't make a tree grow by pulling on its leaves, right? You have to create the conditions and see what happens. And so obviously if the child has been checked with a resonance, images, and we've done a clinical, and we've seen that there's actually, because most children who are being diagnosed this, many don't have a clinical evidence of something going wrong in their biological aspect. So it has to do more with functional sensory integration and processing. They're learning at a different style. And so they're going to need a more individualized timing. So if we group children by age and not by developmental level, what's going to happen if we have a class of 4-year-olds, which we know that just regular development could have a 2-year difference and both children be neurotypical. So in a 4-year-old grade classroom, I can have a child who speaks and who draws and writes like a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old, and I can have a 4-year-old who's still at a 3 or 2-year-old level, and they're both neurotypical. But the way we look at things and the way we start maybe smiling more, stimulating more the child who knows who's doing more things, and the way we look at like something is wrong with a child who's 4 but is actually more at a 3-year developmental level, that starts creating a difference in the way that child, children will go, it's called go inside and they'll be more shy, or they might go outwards and be more hyperactive and impulsive. So going back to the question, all children, right? It's an exercise we have to do and see what happens when we see, oh, okay, but I think this is a romanticized way of looking at life or trivializing it, and it's not. Children have a diagnosis, and nobody's saying that it's not, diagnoses aren't useful, but when we're with the child, it could be from when you're debating a lot of things that need to do with resources. We can understand that we maybe need still diagnosis to identify what's happening. But when we're in classrooms, when we're on a one-to-one, it's very important to awaken and to really be practicing our own way of seeing our beliefs and our biases, and really being able to be present. Our state of presence is maybe the most important pedagogical tool for all children, and especially children who need to be felt and then feel that they're being felt and recognized just because who they are, and not because they have to permanently try to become normal to get a smile or to be accepted. And so we have to separate achievement from who you are. Everyone is 100%. One of the most, the oldest mantra is Soham, is I am. I am why? I am because I live and I'm here. And so our model is based on the value of a person is based on his achievement, what he has or what he does or what he can do. And so if I value more, and I'm more valued in looking in how people smile at me and look because I did a good drawing or not a good drawing, that's how slowly we're dehumanizing that our culture actually. Because one thing is what you are able to do, and the other thing is who you are, and you are because you are. And that comes very closely with mindfulness. And usually the children who have a diagnosis, they receive less smiles, less words per day, less happiness. And so then eventually, like for example, a child with Down syndrome who's born and nobody knew that he was going to be born, and his mom realizes that, the child doesn't know he has Down syndrome. The child is expecting smiles, words, happiness, celebration, congratulations, and all the things that happen when a baby comes. So he doesn't even know. But eventually then our system says he has mental retardation, when actually we know that there's many cases of children with Down syndrome because of many of the aspects of the environment. I'm not saying that's the only cause, but the environment has the last word. It's like the Americans say, genetics loads the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So today, mindfulness is almost indispensable, just because the world is changing in front of our eyes, because we can't plan more ahead of maybe a few days ahead, even and less and even more the children who are having the need to obtain their meaning of life from connection, because they're being disconnected. So this means we need to make things even, the world, the meaning comes from interactions in the world, human interactions. When we're not achieving that, we need to see what's happening with the interactions. We're the ones, the adults are the ones who are giving this to children, right? And then again, if I am really awake and alive and awed in my connection with my body, usually children don't get stuck on this because they've had that joy de vivre. They have the body has given them the experience of what life is all about. So we're having so many risk factors, and so doing mindfulness is not for children or not for special needs children. Actually, we do it for us first, but the consequences of this are unlimited, right? So we're going from this model of trying to see each profile of each child, right, and trying to understand that inclusion is not it's misspelled there. Inclusion is not a strategy or a politically correct stance, but the natural consequence of people and communities that understand and work on the development of their self-knowledge, empathy, and compassion as the most important path. Today, we have to teach sustainability. We have to teach to take care of the world. We have to teach for inclusion. And actually, if we awaken, right, in our practice, I mean, I wouldn't dare not be inclusive. I wouldn't dare mistreat the world or not think about sustainability. So it's a natural consequence of practice is becoming very in touch with my humanness, and not only my shared humanity, but my shared connection with the rest of the world, right? And so that's where really true compassion is. So this is, again, not new. This is where we come from. We are who we are, and this is a very good manuscript. You could download it free on the internet. This is Humberto Maturana, which together with Francisco Varela, were the initiators of everything that is happening. Francisco Varela is the first person who, as a scientist from Harvard and MIT, I think he went and he led the first team who started studying the llamas in India. Or in Tibet, right? They started studying and connecting and seeing what the difference was in their states. And so Maturana is a biologist who says we are who we are because during a certain point our love was unconditional. Then we became arrogant or aggressive, but that's cultural. If we would still continue on a trend where we wouldn't be competing between ourselves for our meaning, our identity is based on who I am, what I'm doing, or what I have, it's not about achieving love, it's about decreasing my identification with my mind and my beliefs so as to allow, again, this syntropy to reawaken, right? And so every child is an opportunity of practice, and especially children. We call, well, it's not me. I mean, we usually who practices mindfulness, every situation that brings supposedly, because there's no negative emotions, actually, they're just practice opportunities. Every instance where I encounter someone who obliges me to work within myself is a teacher, right? Is a master, right? And so children who have different learning styles, different rhythms, who need different environments are actually children who oblige me to be present because I have to use my state of presence to see the more details of the environment. So those of us who work in education, I mean, I think we're losing that idea that meditation or contemplation is only something about Buddhist or something about Eastern philosophy, but still it's easier. And in our special system, tomorrow I have a meeting with the educational department here in the city, and actually we talk more about metacognition and try to avoid talking about mindfulness or talking about meditation, because it's still something that is not really understood. But metacognition is a good way to talk about that, which is that as Einstein said, we can't resolve the problems we have thinking from the same level of consciousness. So metacognition is our next level, right? We come from being reptiles, which was the mesencephalus, really low brain. Then mammals developed the limbic system. Then the humans are actually the simios, which is the simios is monkeys, or I can't remember, developed the cortex, and now that was natural by natural adaptation, right? By Darwin's law. Today it's the first time where I have to decide to move to my frontal cortex, because that is a decision. That's a deliberate decision to awaken a way of looking the processes of life instead of the narratives of life. It's life happening while it's not happening. So we're at a point where we decide what is our next evolutionary step. Up to now, it was evolution itself and biology, with syntropy, which brought us to here. Now we decide what I'm doing with my time, the 12 hours I'm awake. How am I paying attention? At what am I paying attention? And what intention do I have with that, right? To compete, to compare, to judge, or I'm using my attention also to unlearn myself to be able to achieve, again, this connection with everything, right? So this is a permanent fine tuning. How do I know I'm in an old paradigm? It's how I'm feeling. How I'm feeling. So it's maybe the pause. I see a child come in who's drooling or who's self-stimulating. I mean, and in that second, I could start practicing, right? Because that's the sign where I have to connect. Because children with autism, most children who don't talk or have difficulties, live almost in a constant state of presence. So they feel who's safe and who's unsafe. They feel who's present and who's not present. So I'm in a disconnected mood. Probably the child might not want to do what I'm proposing to him because my tone of voice, my eye connection with him, the chores I'm giving him are totally disconnected from what he's needing at that point. So that ability to see what the child needs, what he's doing, and how that behavior is not something to control, but something to regulate, is the big paradigm shift, and we're going to see that, right? And so this is Paul Gilbert's emotional system, right? Maybe most of you know it about Paul Gilbert has his compassion courses as after the MBSR, right? He put together another one which is about compassion and connection, right? So he talks about that we're all in these three systems, right? And mostly teachers are at a level of stress where they are mainly in between the red and the blue system. But if we work with children who have different rhythms, really one of the things that's not for them, it's to help us, is to really learn how to notice not how long I stay in the soothing system or in the calm system, but notice when I'm not there, right? Because all these systems are natural systems that we all have. We have been taught in the blue system. The blue system makes us compete, and sometimes we turn on the red system because we think that we are in danger. It's actually our ego who's in danger. We're not physically in danger, but it's this competitive mode that we become in danger. And actually, if we really know how to awaken our calm, soothing system, which to manage, right? See that I'm being stressed and accepting that I'm stressed, not wanting to change that, but in that way of looking at things, usually that's the way that most of my clarity increases and my stress decreases. So education in people who work in the healthcare system, people who learn in the educational system, and especially people who work with children who have different learning styles, one of the most important aspects, and there's a lot of research about looking at which schools are most inclusive. Here there's an important study where the schools that were most inclusive not necessarily had people who were prepared to working with children with special needs. So usually the question is, what do you mean not being prepared? You can't prepare yourself for life. You need to be present to know how to deal with what's happening here and now to make decisions, right? So that human part of education is the one that actually the children who have different needs are people improvers, right? Like a dad said, my son improves people because he obliges them to work on their presence, level of presence, as the most important step, right? Obviously, this is very important because this has to be voluntary, right? We could give the theory, but this is all about practice, right? And actually, look at this. This comes from the 1910s. This is Rudolf Steiner, right? Not talking about these systems. I put the colors in, but he talked about that there's a type of education and relating that is based of consequences and fear and survival. If you do this is be the consequence, and the higher the consequences related to violence or to mistreatment, right? Obviously, more of the consequences. Most of us are actually, I'm going into my 60s, so we've had a lot about that type of education, which does mean that you could make yourself angry but not be angry, right? Which is knowing how to work from the green one, but being able to see what is needed in each case. It doesn't mean that it's all just respectful parenting and there's no limits, and there's limits have to be there. The problem of limits is when they're reactive, when they come from an anger state or from a control state, right? So maybe sometimes it's misunderstood that children don't need their limits, right, or the consequences, as this doesn't have anything to do. So the three predominant levels of our emotional states will cause the climate of a classroom, right? This doesn't mean that 1 and 2 are wrong. It means that 1 or 2 could be technically used from a really awakened 3, right? Which is closing the circle of what we need. Because sometimes it's misinterpreted that we all have to be lovey-dovey and allow things to do. Mindfulness and ABA go very well together. ABA is not a model that is totally out. I mean, it allows you to understand when a behavior needs co-regulation, when a behavior needs a consequence, and when the child needs to self-stim because he needs to self-regulate on his own. Because in ABA, we have the ABC. Every behavior has an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence. And maybe children are misbehaving because they want to go outside of the classroom. They learn as a communication style. So they want avoidance, or sometimes they want more, right? They learned that by crying and stomping, I'll just give them the cell phone because I'm tired. And so ABA and mindfulness is really a very, very good combination, right? So we can see how the awareness reorientation mode has a lot to do with the lobes of our insula, which are constantly in connection with our body. My body tells me how I'm feeling, what I need, what I can offer myself, and what I can ask for. Those are 4 important questions, right? What I need comes from what I'm feeling. Anger, thirst, I'm tired, I'm bored. It's not good or bad, but the closer I learn how to think feelingly, because I can only think feelingly in the presence. And this, which sounds like something ideal, is what's happening. I mean, again, it took us 50,000 years to come from this point, but the mind and thought started 50,000 years ago. And we're coming to the end of where we only use thought, and we have to come and know that for our evolution, we have to start using our feeling to undo my little idea of who I am to become who I really am, right? So usually these 3 systems work again. The focus system is when I work and I do things, I am not concerned, I'm focused. But things happen when I'm not doing something. That's when we start getting concerned, right? That's when the default mode network starts talking negatively to me. That's usually 2 weeks after the big CEOs from company take their vacation break. It's where we have panic attacks, right? Because we have nothing to do and we need to do something to decrease. Well, mindfulness, again, is this way of having a looking and knowing how to self-calm, right? So I'm going to send these to you, Crystal, because we're not going to have time to go through them all, but you could give them.
I want to give you a heads up, indeed, Christian. That we have it's 5 to 9, so
it would be great. I'm gonna quickly finish so I can come to the end. So we have these 3 systems, right? They even have a need, but for children, and usually smaller children, we need to learn how to co-regulate early, because what we're learning is we're seeing children with disabilities, and we're thinking that most of the disabilities are because they have a disability. And many of the behaviors we're seeing are not from the disability, are a disengagement from the level of learning and the learning style of the child and the demands of the environment, right? So I'm going to continue with this. So we have here the things that probably most of you know about mindfulness practice of the pause, just feel where I am, feel my body, being able to acquire a perspective and be able to choose, seeing my reactions, but being able to respond, right? I'm going to go through this. So this is where we are from a traditional view to a view of neurodiversity, right? And we have both systems, right? And so where my attention go, my energy goes, and where my energy goes, things grow. So one is the one I've been educated in, so I have to learn how to unlearn it. And that has a lot to do with seeing it and knowing that it's complementary to a new way of respecting, right? Again, behavior of the child is a choice. He could choose to, or behavior reflects a state of neurophysiology. Our education focuses, or our behavioral treatment, on consequences. And my first question is, why is this child flapping? Why is he twirling? Why is he having an emotional dysregulation? So most of these shifts are here, right? It's we prioritize how we are with them and what's happening to them instead of trying to control behavior. And for that, we need our own practice, our own mindfulness practice. But we could also practice with children. This could be for another talk. We have circles of 8 children with autism or children with different diagnoses, and actually they could withstand, especially talking about Eline's model or attention matters, they could do the whole classroom. Obviously it's catered to their specific, but they could be for 30 minutes or 40 minutes sitting and playing or meditating, which they can't even be 10 minutes in a regular classroom. So the attention is there. It really depends on what we're prioritizing, right? And so we're going from regulation, which is what a reptile does, to relate, which mammals, to reason, and now we're going to conscious reflection. But this is the last point, is the one we have to develop, right? So just quick and going to the answer. All children learn. I haven't engaged one child who doesn't learn. The only difference is his style of rhythm, process, and modality of learning. No child has a limit. If I think a child has a limit, I can't be with that child because I have a bias. It doesn't mean that he's going to learn at the same rhythm. It doesn't mean that he's going to be going grade by grade, because there's a big difference between culture and biological potential to learn. Most of our limits in the learning of children has to do with our culture, our health system, our educational system, but not the biological potential to learning, right? So we have to make that big difference, right? It's individualized adjustment, co-regulation. Children with diverse learning styles profit from one-to-one and not taking them to 5 different treatments by 5 different professionals doing 5 different things. They need one-to-ones, right? It's like Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller's story, if you know what I'm talking about. So children-centered approaches by people who know how to co-regulate and modulate for parents instead of telling them what to do. They need models as well from this health system, educational system. True education is all together. If it's not all together, it's not maybe education. That's kind of a strong stance. And then we have this model that helps, and I'm going to finish here, which is called PREMA. This is a model which is just a empirical model. But if we know the P and the R of each child, no matter what age he has, how he processes, how he integrates, and how he modulates sensory, affective, and motor experiences, we'll know what his level of emotional regulation is, how full his glass is, and how straight his glass is, right? So if I know the P and the R of a child, no matter what age he has, I will know what is the ideal environment, what is the pedagogy, the method he needs. Is it child-centered, or does he have frustration tolerance, and now I can challenge him more because he keeps on learning despite the challenges? Those are different levels of developmental attention. And how much experience does the professional, the teacher, have to have, depending on the complexity of the P and the R of the child or the adolescence? The more complex the autism and the behavioral problems, the more I need someone who's really practicing the A, right? Which we usually say prema, which is love in Sanskrit. A is actually the standpoint because it's A. Prema starts with A, right? Because it's all about my mind, my ability to co-regulate complex situations. The less complex a child, the more common sense I could use. The more complex, I really need to be practicing and professionalizing my A and actually my prema, because this is an interaction, right? The more complex the child is, the more I need how to achieve an alertness, an affect, and an attention and an action that respects his level of learning for him to learn, right? And so that's something I do from the outside. So create safe and secure adjustment environments. We saw this. This is in Spanish, but they have really good, in Spain, they have really good examples of how they're working with knowledge, empathy, attitudes, and compromising the teacher, not teaching, but being in their state, right? I'm going to go on with this. This is about the zone of proximal development from Vygotsky. We have to see a good adjustment from poor adjustment looking at the children, right? And so we're talking, and this is going back to the question, Children with special needs, we're not talking about any more children with special needs, although obviously they need special arrangement, but talking about children who depend on people who develop their special essential qualities to be with them, right? So I'll leave this for some other time. This is the rice experiment that we do with children in the Eline's model in chapter 8. Once we finish the 8 lessons of mindfulness with children, we tell the teacher to cook 2 handfuls of rice, and we put them, and once they're cooked, we put them in 3 jars. One jar we put a label that says love, one jar we put a label that says hate, and one jar we just leave a label in blank. And so we tell them for a month, 2 the same children, to have the intention to speak in a low voice to the rice. I hate you, how ugly you are, you're not useful, for just 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. To the other one, they speak lovingly. They say how I love you, they're so nice, so pure, so clear. And after 7 days, and you could do this in your home, one of the rices is going to, actually 2 will start to rot and become black and have molds. Who do you think is the first one to mold? It's not the hate one. It's the one that we don't even give hate because I don't need to look at you. You don't exist. And usually a diagnosis usually causes that to children and to their brains, because if I see the diagnosis, I don't see your life, you as a person, as someone who's there, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to see you, or I'm going to look at you, but I'm not going to see you. And that is felt by most of the children who have a diagnosis throughout their whole life. They're being administrated, taken in from one place to another, but few have a real connection with them, right? So this is a very good way of seeing, because the brain is water, and we resonate, and we are who we are because we received that unconditional love. Some children never receive unconditional love. So it's so important to really understand this from this way. This is just a different says about how that is. So this is the end. One day after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, humanity will harness the energy of love. And that day, for the second time in history of the world, we will have discovered fire. And thank you. And the last one, just look at this documentary. This is a very, very, very practical way of understanding what's happening with children who are spellers. They're called spellers. Most of the nonverbal children with autism who we thought had autism are dyspraxic and apraxic and are very intelligent, but can't speak and can't program their body to do what they want. So the only thing they could do is maybe flap or things like that. So this is a must for everyone who is really understanding this shift in paradigm. And Michaela is not the only one. This is another book. It's called The Reason Why I Jump, which is also, both were written by the children. It says it in Spanish, but it's in English. It's The Reason Why I Jump. This is another one, which is, it's a child who you could put this information, right? He's a PhD in art, and he's nonverbal autistic. And most of the children are completing really high studies, and they're autistic. And actually, why this happens is because they did find something who saw them, right? And who found them. And I think most of the children are in this state, although maybe I don't think I'm exaggerating, but you have to see to do. So I'm going to leave